Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here or you're watching on YouTube, you can head over to officehours.global to find out more about what we do. And for our regulars, you know how it is. The first hour is answering your questions on media, virtual production, and events. The second hour, we take time to spend a little bit more time on a subject matter that we want to learn more about or just discuss. And today we'll be talking about future trends in events, production, and event marketing. So you producers, go ahead and submit your questions so that it gives our panel enough time to think about it and provide you the best answer possible. So again, to learn about the schedule, head over to officehours.global. And Bill, let's take it away.
Absolutely, Liberty. Good morning. And our first question, the highest rated one among them from today is from John Foltz in Sealings Grove, Pennsylvania. He says, I'm looking for a pan tilt zoom camera for outdoor sports. My budget is around $2,000 US. I have a pan tilt PTZ optics and a Panasonic. Both look good inside, but the image is a struggle with an outdoor scene. Suggestions?
Let's start with Guy.
Yeah, those two models that you already have, you might want to look at if they have a filter thread, just putting an ND filter on them and seeing if that helps, because some of them, they just get overwhelmed by light. So they're meant for indoors. The model that I'm pretty impressed with is right over my shoulder and just took almost $1,000 price drop over the last week. So if you're using NDI, this is one of the few cameras on the market that have full NDI. So most of the ones that are from Panasonic or from PTZ Optics will be NDI-HX, which is a compressed version. So you really, when you're looking at the market, you want to see, are you using HDMI, SDI, SRT? And that's another thing is some of these new models, like over the weekend, Canon, excuse me, just gave away a free SRT upgrade at IBC for their CRN 300. Jonas is super impressed with that camera, so I'd be looking at that one. So you're doing the right thing by asking folks their opinions. So I would still keep doing a little more research, especially after the show, and see if anything else changed.
And did you say $1,000 price drop?
Yeah. Yep. So they're $1,995 now. So some of the folks that bought 3 of them, I know Todd Reynolds just got one for his school. He might want to return it or see if they'll honor that $1,000 price drop, because that's a pretty whopper of a price drop. And right now I've got one, its brother, the 4K version of it hooked up outside. So if you want to look at what they can do outdoors, I mean, it's pretty amazing how you could really get some, this is live out my window. I mean, you could really get some serious zoom on these things.
Awesome. Thanks
for the
demo.
Going all the way across. Yeah, so they're pretty impressive once you get, especially at IBC, they announced some new software that will allow you to do repeated moves. So if you're doing like award ceremonies, it'll actually call up that same move over and over again. So it's repeatable. And so that can take a load off of an operator if you're doing the same exact sporting event where it's like, okay, they bat, ball goes flying. Like we're going to go from this camera to this camera to this camera. So you can actually get them in sequence too. So that's another thing to look at is the software from the manufacturers. What are they doing with their software and how much does that software cost? Because some people want auto tracking, like Panasonic's famous for their auto tracking, but it costs $2,000. So you just got to weigh it out. Is it going to be an operator operating it, or are you going to use AI? Because that's another big thing in the future. A lot of people don't think about that. They're just like, oh, right. Yeah, I'll just let it sit there, or I'll have somebody manning it. Okay, that person manning that camera for a year, how much do they cost? So, I mean, AI could be the future. I don't want to put camera operators out of a job, but they're certainly helpful, especially for repeat performances.
And John Foltz is asking, what model are you using, Guy? That's a +1 by Paul Wallace as well.
Yeah, the P200 is the model that I'm using that's over my shoulder. The one that you just saw out the window is the P400, which is the 4K version. That one in HD mode will give you a 40x reach. So that's the other thing is if you need that reach, you want to be looking at those numbers, because while I'm impressed with the new Canons, the CRs, I know Greg Gibson just bought 3 of them. They're only 15x. So if you're not having to put them at the end of a ballroom or something like that where you need that reach, then the 15x is probably fine. But even like that FR7, the new one from Sony, I'm a little concerned about people wanting closer shots, and you just can't get them with the lens selection that's available without locking that thing down. So 200 millimeters is about the biggest lens you're going to get on there, and that may not be enough reach in 4K.
Got it. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, and I think you just definitely have to decide what kind of events you're doing. I think that most of the CR and the Sony for what I do, it would be pretty fine because I've stopped doing ballroom shows. like I just don't do those anymore. So having that throw doesn't mean anything to me anymore. It used to, and I used to have 20x, BRC 900s and 1000s and so on and so forth. But I think that market. The problem really is it's just not a very good experience for the online, for folks watching it ever again. It's usually not particularly a good experience, and I think most people are kind of moving away. I mean, we see the demand on that kind of thing dropping pretty dramatically. From what I saw only a couple years before COVID. Like after COVID, if they want to bring people in online, we're not seeing the same demand that we saw before for that. But I think that for sports, you're going to need a long throw, especially on a fixed area. I think Guy's completely correct. And definitely if you're doing ballroom shows, then you'll need it. But I think that what we're using a lot of the PTZs for is actually much closer studio experiences. The thing about PTZs that we didn't really know when we got them, but as we really started moving forward, is that it creates a much more intimate experience for the folks that are doing a round table or anything else, not to have so many people in the room. So you have literally in a small studio, it changes the heat signature of the studio. So it's easier to keep it cool because you don't have as many people, but it's just less of a distraction. So, I mean, that's how far we've gone from not having other people in the room is we don't even want the camera ops in the room, because we want to have no eyes that the people in the studio can see. And so we block out people who might be able to make eye contact, and then we try to put PTZs in because it keeps them from seeing anybody that might be a distraction.
Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. And Paul says, what's the total cost and complete process to get set up with your own ZoomISO at home?
Go ahead, John Wallace.
Total cost for me, what I calculated out was about $5,000 per 4 panelists. So you're looking at like $45 per month for the ZoomISO cost. You got a MacMini around 800, Decklinks 500, Thunderbolt enclosure from Sonnet 300, an ATEM Mini Extreme SDI 1500, another MacMini for whatever you're doing for graphics, a couple monitors, and there you go. I think Mr. Preto may have a better graphic for it, but it's definitely not cheap to go about, but definitely something interesting, excited to go down. I'm doing it myself, so it was kind of fun to put these numbers together and a little scary to see at the same time. So thanks.
Go ahead, John.
First of all, I have to apologize to Paul over the weekend when he asked those questions. I guess there was a snafu on the background. I apologize, Paul. I put together a little slide that the backend crew has because I thought the same thing, Paul. I broke it into two on the light side and on the pro side. On the light side, I'm just using, I don't know why it's so blurry. On the light side, you run just a Mac Mini into either OBS. The drivers for NDI now are in alpha for version 28 or into vMix. And then that one's $28 or $29 a month. And on the pro side, exactly what Mr. Wallace said, which is the Sonic box. And then the card that they like is the Quad 2. That's the one. I sent this to Andy and he sent me the corrections back. And that one's in between $4,000 and $5,000 for the pro version, and then plus the monthly cost.
Okay, go ahead, John. George.
Most of it was covered already, but again, I think Alex always talks about future proofing, so it's a little bit easier for me because I already had Decklink quads in my home studio, and inside of my vMix I have a quad also. So for me, the upgrade was about just the Sonic enclosure, but it's going to cost you about around $5,000. But if you already had a lot of the gear, you could easily get that into the system. And mine is actually working pretty well with the new ISO, so I'm happy about that.
And Guy.
Yeah, it really depends on how you want to roll and what you already have, as some of the other people have said. It's NDI versus SDI. So I'm actually looking at putting together some of these kits and making them just a package, because I'm used to selling the new tech device, which was $8,000. And that was what a news station, how they would bring in Skype users. So that was $8,000. And now being able to do it for half that, news stations are going to be like, what do I need? And some of them, they don't want to buy a Mac. So you can actually just put it in an enclosure. So this enclosure, that's the Echo rack mount is $1,199. So if you get this one here, you could put the Mac Mini inside that and the card, and up to 3 cards with the rack mount, but that's $1,199. So $1,199 plus $995 for the quad card. So the quad will have 8 outputs. So if you only need 4, you could drop down to the $495. That's the Decklink Duo 2. So you're for the basic enclosure, $699. I think John probably just said that there was a less expensive one. Maybe that's the one if you're using the Decklink Duo 2 Mini. You could use the not full height enclosure. So there is one that's cheaper that's not full height, but I haven't tested. I'm going to buy some of these and start to put together a package and see what it looks like. But in my world, you're looking at least $1,100, $1,200 unless you go NDI. And if you go NDI, then I'd be looking at getting a proper switch, which would be the Netgear 4250, which starts at $650. So I would get a really good switch meant for NDI if you're going to be doing this professionally. And
George, you want to add some more to that?
Yeah, I think for folks that are watching, don't be afraid to jump into this game. Alex has already said, he's going to try to train over 100 people. The good news about the Sonic box is that you could build out your system in a Sonic box and be able to use it at home. And it's not really something we should normally do, but you'll be able to use it at home and easily unplug that Thunderbolt cable and go do a job outside. So don't be afraid to think about making these investments.
And is that Sonnix or Sonnet?
Sonnet.
Sonnet, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Because Sarah Doyle says the same thing. She's said in the comments, if you've got a rack, Sonnet has a rack unit with cooling for the Mac. And Alex?
Yeah, and just a reminder, if you're looking for somewhere to test that, we're going to have most days, and we'll start putting it in the email. Most days from 1 to 3 is going to be ZoomISO testing within, and we may move that to an earlier time because some of our European partners would prefer it to be a little earlier. So we're going to see if we can't move that. But right now it's 1 to 3 o'clock. And in many days, there'll be a breakout room with 12 people talking, 12 of us all talking to each other that you can use as kind of a base unit. So that's another way so we're going to be doing a lot of that. And then we'll be doing labs and then second hours. But we're going to spend a lot of energy on learning, getting a lot of people up to speed on ZoomISO over the next month.
Wonderful. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Ray Franklin in Mount Dora, Florida. And Ray says, there is a reason for the FENWICK face template. Can the panel be encouraged to look at the camera when answering questions to the home audience? If we don't look at the camera, we could all be on a phone call.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm super appreciative of what you're saying. And I know that I have been, I think it's just a personal thing. I've been in radio for such a long time. We didn't have to look anywhere. And then in training things, I find myself also focused on interfaces and things. So I'm always looking down at my computer, checking for more information coming in. And it's been a real challenge for me in this new world to maintain eye contact as a instinct. So I think as we do more of this, we're going to get better at it. Just understand that a lot of us are trying to break old habits and get into this new world where we're broadcasting from the same place where we look at interfaces all day long, and our habits are a little hard to reprogram after all these years.
Harshid?
Yes, it is really important to look at your audience, no matter what ability that you may have. And so I do think that is unique to our group that we have the FENWICK framer to, keep kind of a parameter to look at. So, in any other meetings that you might have, you might take example to the FENWICK framer to look at the camera, look at who you're talking to, because that's what's going to give us that realism in communication.
And Guy?
Yeah, this one's a bit tough because I got lucky that we had this teleprompter from 10 years ago and I was able to just bring it home. And what I do when I'm using this setup is, this is over my shoulder. You guys can see that bird dog view now. What I do is I'll drag, and I know Alex does this too, I'll drag whoever's my speaker like you, Liberty, I'll put you in the middle and I could kind of see the outline of my lens behind there. So they call it the nun's knickers, but it's basically this black shroud that goes over with these tight cloth that goes over the lens. But I loosen that up so I can see the outline of the lens, and then I put the person's head that I want to talk to right there. And sometimes I'll put their eyes, I'll line it like dead, like crosshairs. And so when I'm looking at them, I'm really looking at them like dead down the center. So it's a pretty cool setup. I wish everybody could have one of these. It's a joy to use in teleconferencing to have, you could tell that I'm looking dead at you. I mean,
Right.
it feels so natural. And the other thing is that I have on the Stream Deck the ability to hit one button and I go full screen. So let me cut back to that. So what I do is now I have you in there. So see, with my Stream Deck, I'm just pushing a button so I can go from gallery view, and so I'll pop you full screen. And
Right.
I'll do that in meetings constantly, so I can see those little nuances that Alex talks about. Those little, like, are they just doing some little human thing that you would just be like, oh, okay, they get it, or they understand, or maybe they need clarification. It's nice to be able to hit that button and do that. So it's cool stuff. I suggest if you can get starting at the $995 level, getting that iKan 12-inch. I know Alex likes that one and sends it out in kit.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, the biggest thing that keeps me from putting the gallery, because I stay in the gallery mode most of the time during the show, and the biggest reason that I keep it out of my teleprompter, which is where this would be right now, is because I don't have the controls. Like, I just want to have it take over, and I want to be able to click on things and only have to look in one place. And I think that that's technically more difficult than it sounds, but you can't put that on a second screen, for the way that Zoom works. So I have to, for me, I've been thinking through it, and I'm probably going to reorganize, like, get rid of this Mac Mini, not Mac Mini, get rid of the iMac, get a Mac Mini so that I have two mirrored systems and I can, have more control over that. But that's actually why I look a little bit under, is because I'm not actually looking over, and looking straight at a camera without a teleprompter is devastating for me. Like, I spend a lot of time doing it. I don't even understand why they inflict that on people who go to CNN or whatever. Just looking at a dead camera, you end up with dead eyes, and that's something that, as Guy was alluding to here, is that it's worse, in my opinion, to not be able to see anything in front of you while you're looking at a camera. So, and no matter how much you train yourself to do it, the effect on your eyes, I think, is of how they present themselves is not as good.
And George.
So it's interesting that Guy says he looks at the gallery view. Like, right now I'm looking at the dual monitor on my prompter because I can't. Everything gets smaller. It depends on the size of the panel. Everything gets smaller in the gallery view on a 12-inch prompter. But I find that I can't look at the gallery view in the prompter. Like, I'm looking at Liberty right now, or whoever's speaking. But that works for me, just looking at the single person in the prompter and the gallery view is done on my monitor here. And I've trained myself on office hours over the past 2 years to look at the single view in the prompter. So it's kind of hard for me to go back now.
Bill?
And depending on your job, I mean, as a reader today, I'm constantly having to look down to read the questions because they pop up on my main screen. So I don't know how I would get that modal display up into the teleprompter and still be able to see the panel view. And there's just a lot of information that is flowing during the show. And I think like everybody, we're trying to do our best to keep this going, but there's a lot of confusion here.
Yeah, I would say yes, there are a lot of moving parts to it. And I like what everyone said, but what Guy said, having a teleprompter definitely helps with that. But then also forcing and training yourself. Like, I teach, and I notice that when I need to speak and directly in that eye contact, all of that, what it does for the audience. So for years, I have trained myself to do that. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but it can be done. And I think that's probably, like, we've shared a lot of different solutions to help us get to that point. But then, yes, there's a lot of work that comes into it as well. And we'll wrap with Guy.
All right, yeah, one more thing is sometimes I'll switch to this view, which now it's going to go to infinity mode unless I put somebody over there. But let's say I'll pin, replace pin on second screen. So now I'll put Liberty over there. So I have gallery view on the left, and then I'll have the person on the right, and then I'll move them, and then I'll keep my show notes right here. So if there's something that I might forget to say, I'll put it over here, or something I just notes. And then sometimes it just depends. I'll have a monitor down below with Mukana, which I'm hiding right now so you guys don't see it. But this is just another view that you can casually so I have my mouse in my hand and I'm constantly moving this as well. So it just depends.
And how big is that screen?
This is, it's funny because this is a 17-inch prompter at first, but then I moved I took the 17-inch monitor out and stuck a 22-inch monitor down below. So that's why you're seeing it just clipped off. So there's actually more real estate that you guys don't see that's on that monitor. But again, it's a cool setup, and I wish everybody could have this setup because it's so cool. If you're doing a lot of this stuff, I mean, especially at the end of a long day, like if I have somebody full screen, it literally feels like, if it's a 1080p meeting, it feels like they're there. Like, I mean, it's effortless. It's wonderful.
Nice.
I can't say enough about having a good prompter.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And Chris says, I was trying to find moving placeholders like in the movie trailers function. Theirs are labeled so well for a storyboard presentation, and I can't seem to find them or any similar. Any thoughts on a source for those?
Go ahead, Alex.
I don't know about iMovie ones, but for Final Cut and motion VFX is probably the best. They have tearing apart their motion files is like getting a master's course in how to use motion. It's incredible files that you can get, and but they also can drop into Final Cut as just a layer, and you can actually, they have tons of little drop-in areas and so on and so forth. Those are in my opinion, the best.
And Sky?
I also introduced you to Storyblocks, and they also have templates for motion, as well as After Effects and Premiere and all of that. But there's a wide variety of options if you want to just use somebody else's graphics. And I love, as Alex pointed out, I learned so much about things that I can go in and modify, take elements out. I don't want all of the graphic. So templates are very helpful if that's what you're asking.
And Bill?
I'm going to double down on motion VFX only because I have found myself spending the $49 to buy a motion VFX template just because they did one really brilliant move inside of it. I get rid of everything else, steal that one move they did. And for a client on a deadline, when I don't have time to fiddle around making it myself, it may be worth it just to get that one signature move, because in a client presentation world, $49 is pretty incidental.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Paul Shadwell in Turbenthal, Switzerland. Back in the dim and distant past of 2020 and Office Hours 1.0, we could log into Zoom and watch the show without being on the panel. Is that option no longer available in 2.0?
Go ahead, Alex.
Still available. The webinar hasn't changed for years, 2 years, at least 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. So you can still go into the webinar, and this will show up as a program in that webinar. We are in the process of depreciating that. But when we do that, you'll just be able to go into after hours, and there'll be a breakout room. So we're figuring out the breakout room mechanism that we want to use. And most likely, eventually, you'll get to listen to comms as well. There'll be a different breakout room that's like the full order breakout room. We get to kind of listen to everything. But those are the things that we're working on, and they should be by the end of the month, we should be out of the webinar. But right now, you can still go to the old webinar that still exists, and you'll still see the show, just like always.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, what would you suggest for a solid camera for a road system, meeting attendance, and or maybe office hours panel? Would the Sony Alpha 7 II be a replacement for the A6300?
Let's start with Sky.
Sony is a great camera, but it's, again, the Sony's best feature that came out was that it was low light capability. But if you're going to be using lights and things, I would also recommend possibly even a used Lumix. I know we got to observe somebody from their studio using nothing but GH4s, and I went online and found several of them for a much better price. So I would also recommend a Lumix, but be very careful of that micro HD cable. It's awful, but it can be handled.
Is that what you're using now, Sky?
I'm using the Brio.
Okay.
I've got all of my extra Lumixes are down in the case.
Okay, no worries. Alex.
Yeah, I've moved from my road kit to the Insta360, and it is the Link. And I took the case, but I had taken it out, so I didn't have it on the last one. I had a Brio, and I had my internal webcam, so don't go to the very last one last week that I was gone. But if you go before that, I started experimenting with it. I'm really happy with it. It's $300. It's got a PTZ. I mean, for traveling, I'm not quite expecting the same soft depth of field that I would have with some of the bigger cameras. I think you can get that with these other ones, but having the PTZ in a hotel room is pretty useful. Like being able to just sit down and move things around and get it all working and play with the color and do all the other things you want to do is pretty powerful.
We'll look forward to that link in the chat. Thank you. Next question.
Paul Wallace up next from Austin, Texas. Any second thoughts about the Insta360 Link now that some of us have had a chance to pound on it? And would the Insta360 x3 work as a webcam? Oh, X3, I guess, work as a webcam, as a dash cam? It's the very newest.
Alex?
Yeah, the Link is great. As I just said, I didn't see this question. The Link is great. It is the best webcam that I've used so far as the feature set goes. And so I think that it's a pretty strong contender for that type of thing. I don't think the X3 is going to be the right. It's an action camera. It's not designed for this. I don't think that I would use it in this venue.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Here's an interesting one. What hard shell luggage brands have you had good luck with for heavy travel?
Go ahead, George.
Samsonite, but you have to be aware that those locks are easily broken because they're actually clip locks or flips back and forth. But I don't really see a lot of hard cases on travel anymore. I use Yeti, which is pretty durable. It's a waterproof. So, but Samsonite I would think about for hard travel, for hard-sided.
Alex?
Yeah, so I used to do about 250,000 miles a year for about a decade, and in that time, I learned my personal effects fit into one Rush 24 and the Away bag. The way it's the Away carry-on without the battery actually. So those are the two things that I can go indefinitely. The way I plan my clothes, my cleaning, everything else. With those two things, I can go forever. And so. Those are the two things that I have personally. I don't check bags otherwise. Like I don't check personal bags ever. Because it's really, now if I'm doing work, it's all Pelican cases. It's pretty much Pelican cases.
And Bill?
For me, I want to be stealthy if I'm traveling. I usually carry a Case Logic backpack just because it looks like a consumer backpack. It's really good for camera gear and stuff like that, in that it's kind of on the low down. It doesn't really look like something that screams camera stuff, but I carry it almost everywhere. I very, very seldom check it. If I do have to have a lot of personal support stuff, I tend to go with just duffel bags, small, medium, or large. I have all three. Again, it's something that if it's just clothes and you don't have a lot of hard-sided stuff, it's really easy to pick out of the airport return and stuff like that. So I go with those. If I'm going to travel with real gear and I want to protect it, it's always Pelican cases. And we have to spend a lot on them, but most of us have a variety of Pelican cases stored somewhere. And if we have to really go make the equipment arrive safely, that's where we head.
Go ahead, Sky.
Yeah, I'm going to second on Bill's recommendation of getting something that doesn't scream steal me. And I was told to go get a ski bag. And you put a lot of my light poles and tripods and things in that. Now it still says steal me, I'm skis, but it worked a little better. But Alex, I went to the Way bag concept. Would you get something other than black? Because then you don't look like every other piece of luggage that comes down the tray. I generally get the dark blue one. And I used to, the main thing is we use those as well as the Toomey roll-ons because those are the two that we use when we're trying to go into countries without carnet and we want to bring in gear. Because if you bring in Pelican cases, you're immediately sent to customs. So if we're trying to kind of semi-smuggle stuff into a country, we will use and the thing you're looking for is the lightest bag possible. And so the advantage of the Aways is, number one, is they're durable. The Away bag I have now, I've had since they released it. Like I have version 1. I don't know exactly when that was. And I had to take the battery out because it was a screw out battery and they want you to take the batteries out all the time. But the key that I look at for carry-ons is the lightest bag, like the thinnest, because I'm not trying to, it's not going to ever be thrown. So that's kind of my criteria for that. And then I have, typically, if I'm doing a Pelican case, I have media passes. And the Pelican cases actually make it easier as a media pass person to persuade them to let you use it. Because if you come with a home bag and then you bring out a media pass, it's a big delay. So if you have Pelican cases, they're like, okay, we got it. And then off you go. So, and that's kind of a big deal. You can break, we've shattered one Pelican case in Heathrow. They dropped it five stories with cables.
Wow. Okay.
It came out in a one of those little luggage trays, and it's just shards of plastic mixed in with cables. It looks like they just kind of picked it up off the ground and threw it into a tray and put it into return, and then we had to figure out how to get it to Rwanda. Anyway.
Wow. Bill, I like the fact that you had mentioned the duffel bags, because I actually, this was accidental. So for gear, yes, the Pelican cases, I have been looking at ToMe. So now that was mentioned on the panel, I'll look at that a little bit further. But for that hand luggage piece, yes, I've now moved to, go ahead.
I was gonna say for a personal bag, I would go with the Away. They're similar in price, but the Away is lighter and it appears less ostentatious than the ToMe. Although that's, anyway.
Yeah.
I have a lot of them laying around. My kids, I think I got an eye raise because I had all these old ToMes around. So my kids' bags are ToMes, and but they got them, well used before I would never buy a 12-year-old ToMe.
Right. But then the Way was on my list as well, but just that the duffel bag kind of worked. It's not as presentable when I'm going through the airport. I just don't like soft bags because I like hard bags that are a specific size because it's easier for me to get them in the overhead. Like it's easy. The problem with a soft bag is it can expand if you pack it to a shape that you now have to beat into the overhead. The Away bag will fit into almost every overhead. There's a handful of prop planes in Asia that I can't get it into, but outside of that, it will almost always fit into the overhead. And so but if I get a soft bag, sometimes I don't know if I overpack it, I don't know if it'll fit. So I'm usually going after certainty. Got it. And Dan Huber mentions the gator cases as well as an option in the comments. Bill?
Well, I only use duffel bags really for my clothing and soft items and maybe my DOP kit or something like that. So it's the run to the hotel, drop it in the hotel, and everything I need to wear is there. The other stealth thing I do, though, is golf club bags. If you have stands that aren't ridiculously heavy, travel golf bags, because I think everybody back in the airport goes, oh, golf clubs. Okay, we know how to deal with them because we deal with them all the time. They look like golf clubs. I don't think anybody steals golf clubs. It's just something that's so personal, and they really don't have a whole ton of value on the outside. So I've put even folding roller stands in golf bags, packed the rest with soft stuff, and stealthily made my way to my location.
And Nigel?
Yeah, I just came back from a fairly long set of trips yesterday. And so if you want check-in baggage, Briggs & Riley is probably the most expensive and not only lasts very well. Every time it breaks, they just fix it for nothing. So that's, for clothing, that sort of thing is great. The other thing is always make your bag memorable to you. I know this sounds really stupid, but yesterday at the conveyor belt, the woman next to me had every bag that was basically black in color. Said to her husband, I think that's it. No, I think that's it. And no, I think that's it. Mm-hmm. So, I always make sure we have a colored something on it that I know that's it.
To your point, I found just some ribbons because I was like, I got the duffel bag. It was like a last minute thing. And I was like, these ribbons that now stay on there, they might not match, but they definitely help when it comes down the conveyor belt to just see these ribbons flying. Go ahead, Alex.
My wife for a long time had a giraffe, like a fake giraffe, whatever bag, and man, you could tell the moment it came out, she was going to be the only one with that bag. Right. But I definitely have usually some kind of bright marker on it. I mean, with my name tag, on that, that usually identifies it. The other thing I'm about to do is I have some friends that have already started experimenting with this, but I'm going to start inserting air tags into all of them. I've had friends now that has been, I've had multiple friends be able to tell the person at the airport where their bag was in the airport. Like, I know that they said the bag's lost, and they're like, it's not lost, it's here. And I had another friend that was able to tell them which airport it was sitting in when it wasn't there, just because of the air tags. It's kind of I think I'm not going to be traveling at all without those. If I had to check anything, I definitely am going to start putting air tags in all the bags.
Nigel?
I was just going to say, we just did that. We had to check 3 bags for various reasons. We had air tags in each of them. We always knew they were roughly in the same area, but I've decided to demand that all baggage handlers use iPhones, because that increases the ability of me to know some accuracy where the case is.
Yeah, exactly.
And George?
So you made me excited, Alex, because all of my Pelicans that I travel with now, or even going on show site, has air tags. So the company Moment that make iPhone accessories, they actually make a couple of different types of air tags inserts, and you can actually, it's got that super industrial glue, so it glues onto your case on the outside, and you can hide air tags on your inside also to try to, you know.
And what I have, because I have the away bag, but I took the battery out a long time ago, I'm about to put one in the battery compartment. So you'd have to really know. I mean, you'd have to watch the show to know where to look for that. It'll be very hard to find.
Next question.
Tony Mobley, Newton in Georgia, our friend, is up next with the next question. He says, Guy and panel, I think I'm about to think about my next camera to replace my iPhone in the back of the iKan 12-inch prompter, I believe. What is your recommendation? Is this happy iPhone just forward thinking?
Go ahead, George.
Obviously, I'm a big Black Magic fan since version 1. I'm gonna say either Pocket 4K or, you know, right now the Pocket Cinema Camera 6K is just easy to use. You know, with paired with ATM, you can't go wrong.
Guy?
Yeah, I'd say in that same realm, I'm starting to see, because the Pro came out, a lot of people are getting rid of their original 6K that doesn't have the articulating monitor. So on eBay, those are going for a pretty decent price. Insta360 Link is a pretty great camera for, you know, under $500. We've started replacing even our internal staff with Insta360s. The bummer about those is you can't feed them into your ATEM. So if you're doing things like super sources and whatnot through the HDMI workflow or pipeline, then you want an HDMI camera for that. Under $1,000, I mean, the used GH5 is still a great camera. I know David Foster from Live Streaming Pros, as well as Luria, they recommend the Sony A6300 with a Sigma 20 millimeter 1.4. And that is a really sharp package for in that $1,000 range. So it just depends on where you want to spend. But yeah, 6K all day. I mean, many of the panelists here have the 6K, and it seemed to be a favorite among everyone.
Go ahead, John. Wallace.
Yeah. The Sony A5100, A6100 are great budget cameras that you can find used. I think I picked up my 5100 for only $200. So it can be a big step up for a sensor size, especially if you're just moving into your first camera. Try to get used to it. I think you have an ATEM, so obviously the Black Magic route would be awesome, being able to dial everything in from a color side. But the Sony's look great.
Harshit?
I would recommend Sony ZV-E10 as a kind of a multi-purpose camera, because if you're out at your worship or whatnot, you could maybe use it there. And then when you do need it at home, it will do great for you. So we had a guest that Miss Liberty brought in a couple of Mondays ago, and she was using that in her setup. We were talking about brands. So if you want to look back, that's kind of video quality you'll get from it.
Yeah, and it did look fantastic. Nigel?
Yeah, I'm slightly on the edge of this conversation. I've been using the continuity mode in the new Mac OS, and I found that remarkably useful and really easy, works very well. So if you've got the iPhone, particularly if you're going to a 14, that's a great web camera.
Yeah, and the episode in question was the one with Cher Jones. And just pulling in the comments, Chris Widener mentions Canon M50, and that a lot of the vloggers, that's helped them actually to start doing more live, because that was popular a few years ago, and the Mark II. So those are some recommendations there to help you get started, or move over, I should say, into the camera. Because Tony, you've been doing this for a long time, so you are here to stay. You are here to stay. Next question.
Eric Billings in Washington, D.C. comes up next. He says, that was a great Greymatter show yesterday. What is the criteria used to select the guests? I could see a collection of guests like yesterday going down the self-help route as opposed to just interesting topics.
Go ahead, Alex.
Right now, we're doing just interesting topics. So we had someone that was talking about relationships yesterday. And so we've had everything from astronomy to relationships to the COVID to a lot of different things. And Michael Krasny's really good at pulling that information out. It's really a master. We are now not, you won't see the announcements so much in office hours. We put an announcement out where people can sign up for a year for free for if you're from office hours. And we will send out an email today with a 48-hour opening for you to do it for free again, and that'll be it. So after that, we're charging everybody $5 a month after that. So so just keep your eye out for that. But we just wanted to do that because we really want our community to be a core part of the community that's there, because it's such a good community. It makes it easier. So anyway, so we're going to be doing that. But right now, our goal is to really cover the gamut. I mean, we've everything from a tier 1 documentary person, director that we're hopefully going to be interviewing on Wednesday, to the head of the International Seafood Sustainability Foundation talking about tuna fishing, to a lot of different, to one of the most read Spanish language authors in the world. And so it's just jumping from one subject to another. Currently, we may start to work on verticals at some point in time. Michael's used to daily shows, and we're still doing it only weekly because we're still getting our production pipes kind of where we want them. So, but the way it really works is that if you're part of the community, you'll be able to be part of the live stream and ask questions, and then everyone else will get a free podcast. So, so if you see that email go out, there's already an announcement and a link in our Discord. And there's another Discord community that's a server that's up that will be part of that community as well. And then so that's available. But we wanted to again make it free for office hours folks. So take a look at Discord, and then also post look for the email that's going to go out to everybody today.
Nice. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And for our producers, we have room for a few more questions to take us to the top of the hour when we'll transition to talking about events. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, back again with, for those who can't afford the new Sony FR7 PTZ, we can dream, right? He notes. What's the best PTZ mount with great performance for an iPhone or an Android phone?
Go ahead, Guy.
You know what happens when you don't say budget, right, Paul? This guy goes to the limit. You may as well just get a PTZ camera, though, because this one's $2,000, and this is one of those heads. There's only two that I really know of that people are using. This is one of them from Solray Works, and it's called the NBot. And you actually take the HDMI out of the camera and you plug it into this, and you can control the head through NDI, or you can take the video and the audio as well as control with this thing called the NBot. So that's one option. The other one's a data video, which I still need to send down to Alex as soon as I can figure out what camera he's going to use it with, if it's too heavy or not. But this is something else to look at. Again, it's super expensive. I would probably just buy that camera that's behind me for less than the price of this head. So that's pretty crazy that that this costs more than that whole camera system, and that's a 30x lens on the Bird Dog P200. So this may not be realistic unless you have a camera that you just absolutely love.
Nice. Next question.
Rizal Haridi, it looks like, from Tempe, Arizona, says, would anyone use an Insta360 webcam with a teleprompter?
Go ahead, Alex.
I think you absolutely could. Yeah, absolutely. A smaller teleprompter with that would be a great solution for connecting.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. Can office hours cover 2 or 3 events at the same time? And can they extend the coverage to the full events with larger floor crews and back-end crews? What's up next? Not a South by Southwest question, he notes.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, there's plenty of people in the community to do it. Could we do the size of the solution for IBC, 2 at the same time? Probably not. Could we do one larger, one smaller? That's quite possible. And so we don't, again, I have covered many of these with far less people than we've done in the past, than we've done. So we've thrown a lot of people at it. So it's definitely possible to cover an event. And we'll probably take a slightly different tact at NAB, where there'll probably be more shorter segments, as we go through it. So I think that NAB is the next one. We're going to cover in some way, shape, or form, and we'll put out some feelers for who wants to play in that area. We'll talk about it on Friday. And we could definitely do 2 by spring. We'll definitely be able to do more than 1 at a time.
What do you think it would take, like the ramp up time? Just thinking of like what IBC took in the number of people. Don't quote me, but it was like 30 people, if I counted correctly, to pull that together. What would it take to?
It just depends on how you approach the production. You'll find that I'm probably going to take a little bit more of a hand in NAB's coverage, and you'll find that my approach to it is very practical. Like, so I will be very like, like it all just goes into a pipeline, and then, we've done this for 20 years. And so I've learned over time that the volume of information is more important than everything else. And so we will, we'll push very hard for people to do single takes of, handheld, like we're going to try to move away, like we'll move to things where you can move fast, to different things. A lot of times I try to get rid of interviews from the booths, mostly because that takes too much time to coordinate. So then I have to go back and forth and figure out when they're available and when I'm available and if they're available when I show up, then I might talk to them. But other than that, and we have to see if we have hosts that are ready to do that as well, because I have a very specific way to do it that's built around my abilities. And I don't, we have to figure out, everybody has their own way of doing this. And so, and I'm not sure if I'm going to NAB New York, so that's why we have to, I may want to do something else there. But really I think that one of the things that we want to, it can be done a lot faster with, in certain, with certain approaches. So I think that I'm really happy with what we've done so far. And I think we've learned a lot, and we've done things that I didn't think were possible. Mm-hmm. And again, I think that we would also say, well, we can't do two-way with every booth we go to, like we would do two-way where in the ones that make sense, there might be a kit that is doing two-way and a kit that isn't doing two-way. And, those are the things that, so you have to kind of start making it aerodynamic, to do them. And I think that we want to keep on adding certain pieces back to it. And for bigger ones, like next spring's NAB will be a big one. My goal for next spring is to have either 2 or 3 live views and a studio place to work. And, like that'll be something bigger. But I want to experiment with a leaner show in New York, because it's a smaller show. I want to experiment with, kind of a leaner setup to make that work. And so we'll, but I think that's, you can do it in a lot of different ways. We've done it with 3 people, and we've done it with, I've done it with 25, and it's not as big as the one we did for IBC. But usually, to put in perspective with 3 people, we've done, 40 hits in a day, and so we feel like we were run over by a truck when we finished, but it's just one after the other. But there's a bunch of things to do to get rid of, to make it more efficient. But, again, not talking to the marketing people at the booth is a big piece of that.
I'll cut that out.
Yeah,
it'll be good to see that the lean one, though, because we've seen us grow, so we know what it takes for a large one. But then, like this lean one, that would be really,
and the hard part is you have to. The hard part is getting a camera. The biggest thing that makes a difference is the camera operator being able to do what we call active viewing, which is that they just go to what they're interested in, and then they come back and go in and go out and go in and go out and move around. And there's no inserts. Like inserts for hits are brutal, because it just requires too much editing to get it out the door. And so you have to templatize everything so that there's just lower thirds. And this is where Final Cut works really well with motion, is you build all the stuff in motion and then you have it in Final Cut. This is what Alex Goldner is really good at for the BBC, is that they're all set up and you just type in the names and hit go. Just, you just add it. But you should be able to post every piece that you do in less than 30 minutes. Like that's kind of the, and usually I can post them in 10 or 15 minutes each, because we don't add any detail to them. So, like we just, and, because what people really want to see is the content, and so that's the, and I think, we'll find things that after we've done all the great work that's been done already, people will look at my approach to it and go, well, we really missed this thing we did in IBC or the thing we did in Cinegear, and then we'll bring that back, so we're just taking a lot of different tacks, with the process.
Data collection. Nice. Yep. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. Douglas says, Alex, you mentioned you had a Pelican case shatter. Would you trust Anvil cases more for heavier travel?
Let's start with Alex.
Yeah, I'm not going to change from Pelican cases because they're all the same size. So there's the issue is I've got so many of them and they're all exactly the same size. That's really becomes important when we stack them on carts. So they're almost all of them are 1650s. We have now a couple SKBs because we're using the SKB fly kits, which what do they call them? I think they're the fly. They used to be called the fly kits, where you put the rack into the case. But in general, I don't want lots of different sizes. Like that's the thing that really kills you when you're loading out at an airport or you're loading somewhere else. Is lots of variable sizes really kills you. So I'm not gonna change now. And by the way, I just want to make sure it's clear. It was a 100-pound bag full of cables that fell 5 stories. Like when I say it broke, it wasn't like, the Pelican cases have not broken, and anything that breaks on them, they replace whatever we've broken on them, latches and other things. But this was an absurd. It was when they just opened Heathrow 5 and the luggage system wasn't working correctly. so it was a very unusual case. I mean, we've watched people throwing our cases all over the place, while we're doing it. And so I take video of it while it happens and sent it to our guys going, when you're packing, I just want you to visualize what's going to happen to that gear.
Right. Sky.
Well, and I'm glad Alex, defined that it wasn't the case that broke. It was, it had circumstances that broke it. So any case is not going to help. In the concept of an Anvil case, I've had several Anvil cases. There's great packing inside. I've also had rack mounts concepts for the bigger with the wheels and things like that. But it was, again, circumstances, it was not going to survive a forklift. And the two holes that went right through the gear was not the Anvil case's fault.
Anvil.
Yeah, the other thing that for a while, and I think it's still that way, the weight of these cases, a Pelican 1650, even empty, at least in the old days, I don't know if they made them any lighter, was like 35 pounds. So if you're flying for a light duty thing and you're trying to get by without paying a lot of cartage fees, you don't have much weight between that and the 50-pound airline limit. So you don't have much to put inside. The 1500 series, which are more carry-on, they have an air carry-on case that are lighter, that'll hold less. That's not as big a problem in terms of actually the weight of the case and the gear. But I always think about, what's the case starting out? Anvil cases, wooden metal, start out really heavy. So you're pretty sure that just the case alone will probably get you pretty close to that limit if it's of any size. And then you're just looking at having to budget for that, and you have to get yourself in a different mode. Then you're a professional traveler, not a casual traveler, and they're going to look at you different. And all the things we've talked about on the phone or on the program over the course of years, which is having relationships, getting to know the portage people at the airports by name if you can, so that they can grease your way through when you come in with 15 bags and have to get them dealt with. Those things all become as important as anything else you'll do.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Ronnie Hofsey in Tromsø, Norway. And Ronnie says, what Black Magic Decklink cards for ZoomISO would be the best alternative for 1084 channel and 8 channel? And which SonnetTech 1-slot enclosures would work perfect on a MacMini M1? Is it an idea to have more slots for more cards as we move forward?
Go ahead, George.
So the Decklink Quad and the Decklink Duo would be your choices. Decklink Duo for 4 channels, Quad for 8 channels. If you want to max out ISO, you're gonna need a Decklink Quad and the Duo to get 12 channels. The Sonic Echo SE1 is going to give you 1 slot. The SE3 is going to give you 3 slots. If you wanted to do a quad and a duo in one box, the SE3 is the best one to go with, but then you have 1 slot that's unusable. I personally like to use 2 separate SE1s. That way I could use any one of the cards that I want to at any given time. But that's going to be your choices for the Decklink and for the Sonnets.
Alex?
Yeah, I would stick with, we have the Sonnets, and I would stick with 2 separate ones right now connected to it. It seems like it's a little bit more overhead, and it does take up another Thunderbolt. But the issue is, I think you could daisy chain them, because it's really not that much bandwidth for that. So you could daisy chain them if you wanted to. We've put them directly in, and I would probably stick with and also get the quad card so that you have 8 channels out for that. And I would probably get, even though you could do a quad and a duo and you'd max it out. The max out right now is currently connected to the high bandwidth mode at Zoom, not the limitations of the Mac Mini. So I would probably buy only quad cards at this moment. And I kind of wish I had bought quad cards when I built this system because you're going to want to be able to keep on adding 8s out. From our testing, 12 out is less than 50% capacity. So it's of the Mac Mini. So you could relatively easily go to 16 out if there was more bandwidth available. So that's I wouldn't, and I think we're going to be happy with 12 right now. I would probably stick with 8 per Mac Mini. Like I like lots of overhead for shows. I don't want my Mac Minis to suddenly get surprised or get hot or get whatever. So I would probably do 1 Sonnet and 8 channels. That's the math I'm doing is 1 Sonnet, 1 Mac Mini, and a card for each 8 channels, not 12.
And Guy.
Yeah, Alex, this one's more pointed at you. Would you go to the rack mount version? I know that you had some regrets getting those units after you had 4 of them kind of dangling off.
Yeah, I'd like to try the rack mount. The problem with the rack mount though is I think it's only one, right? It's only one. Yeah, so I think it would. I think that a pretty solid system for this, to your point, would be a quad in a 1U with a Mac Mini is that rack mount. And I think that if I was building systems, that's what I would build is an 8 output, and that total cost is going to get you into less than half of 4 outputs on a Skype TX. Not that I'm bitter, and an incredible amount. Like the Dante for Skype TX never really worked, and so it was always kind of a disaster. And so I think there are things that the Skype TX box will have that aren't currently in ISO, which is a lot of the talkback functions and a lot of other bits and pieces. But I think that those can be done with other ways of using Zoom. But I think that if I was going to package them up as something that I'm selling, I would probably use that 1U with a quad card. Yeah.
Next question.
JJ McKenna's in next, and he asks this, possibly a question with different panelists, but it would be nice to get a postmortem of the total cost for the field teams and examine how much is saved by using a fully remote pipeline, if any. I'm assuming that's for IBC.
Probably, yes. There's been a lot of conversations about that since Saturday. So I know that there's a second hour coming with Richard and the team. So we'll stay tuned for that. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Up next, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. James Babbitt, San Diego. Great audio quality on the Greymatter show yesterday, along with the Heil PR40. What other mics did you use?
Alex, real quick.
Yeah, we used that's the new T-Bone. So our guest had a T-Bone and Michael had a PR40. It probably didn't sound as good as it actually did sound because the way I set this up, this first time we had set them up in the room, and I think you only heard the T-Bone actually. so you only heard the second, our panelist, you heard Michael through that one. So, but yeah, I thought it sounded really good. I'm going to keep testing it. Again, I don't like the USB feature, but wow, the mic itself for $85 is kind of amazing for what it's doing.
Next question.
Looks like Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. And he says, I think I could pull out my GPU and then he's got, I think, a graphics card, a GVRX 580, and put it in a Decklink card for use for ZoomISO? Question mark?
Alex?
You just remember that ZoomISO only works on a Mac. So it is written straight to literally Apple's metal to make sure that it has the efficiencies that it needs. So if you go to that, the way you're getting that out of a PC is Zoom Rooms, and so that's not going to quite. I don't think that'll work. So if you're on a Mac, yeah, an M1 specifically, that's kind of the minimum configuration.
Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. Up next, as features of Zoom Advance and Office Hours back crew controls more and more of the production, is it possible someone on the back end could control and alter the panelist's background image if green screens were used?
Go ahead, John.
Yes. I think if we already use the green screen with the Black Magic switcher that we're using. We could already replace the panelist image that the anyone outside of the Zoom meeting would be seeing.
And Alex.
The real challenge with that is that it's really hard to do a good green screen. So, to get green screen to be done at a level that I would consider acceptable for the show, it means it's not so much that can we change it, it's that are we going to put the panelists through the trouble of putting up a proper green screen, like a production level green screen with production level lights? That's something that I think is highly unlikely, which is why even I don't use it anymore. I found that to be kind of a heavy way to approach the problem. And so I think it'd be highly unlikely that we're going to move to digital backgrounds anytime soon for the panelists. One thing that I am interested in with EasyCast is the potential of doing DMX, where we may start testing it where we have a handful of panelists with their lighting being DMX, where we can actually control it remotely from a central server to change lighting, which would be kind of cool because we turn everybody's lights off and then everybody up, and we could have them all pop up and stuff like that. We could do a lot of interesting things.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas, and the last one for the first hour here. I'll try that question again. All deference to Guy. Is there a good pan tilt zoom for the killer new iPhone from Apple, the 14 Pro Max? Also, what case for the iPhone 14 Pro Max?
Go ahead, Alex.
The only thing that would really do that, I think, would be the DJI, whatever they call it, little thing.
Osmo,
I can't think of it right now. Osmo.
No.
Yeah, the Osmo, for it. But I don't think that there's any, I don't know what the SDK is like for that and whether you'd be able to actually use that as a PTZ. But that would be probably the only thing, or possibly the one that Guy showed that you'd have to figure out some rig. I'm sure it's not a weight problem. So.
Anvil.
I went rogue. I've been buying the Pro Max in every iteration that I've done, but I don't like the biggest phone. And so I looked very carefully at the cameras and all the internal processing. And the 12 Pro Max and the 12 Pro both have exactly the same spec. The only thing they do is one has a slightly less long-lasting battery because it's physically smaller. And so I just went with that. So and Apple had the kind of slim case available there, and I figured if they picked it, it was probably going to be good. So that's the configuration I ordered.
And Guy.
Yeah, there is in Switcher Studio a way and FENWICK Pro as well, a way to control those DJI gimbals. So that might be a way to control as well. So yeah, I'd take a look at those.
All right, we wrapped up our first hour and we're making this transition to talk about events, event production, and event marketing, and just some of the trends that we've seen. We're coming to the end of the year, so a lot has happened this year. And if you are watching and you're a part of the community, I posted some links in Mukana for you to look at. There are a couple of events that, one that recently happened, Ubisoft did their keynote, if we can say, for the year. And they use virtual production sets for them and it looks like it was, of course, pre-recorded. And then also Accenture has been talking a lot and heavily around the metaverse and just seeing how people are using those elements into their conferences and just seeing a shift even from more and more virtual events, even though the world has opened up. So the metaverse is definitely a space to keep our eyes on. I will work on getting more guests in that space. Web3 being another area of how people are using NFTs for event coverage and memorabilia when doing so. So looking at getting some folks in that area, but I'm definitely open to hearing from the panel what you're seeing in the event space. And especially accessibility has been something that has come up. We're doing a couple of conferences this week where that was like high on demand of the content that's going to be captured at the events and making sure that, okay, the standard of, captions and them working with interpreters on site and just those elements that might be normal for us, but just seeing the demand that the industry is asking for that to take place. Bill?
I might be jaundiced because I do this every day and I understand how much Zoom can bring to the table for these. But I was talking yesterday, I was at a wedding actually, and I ran across somebody who worked with a company that I used to work for before, and they are part of their team doing streaming. And they're one of those companies, and there are many out there who all went with big Microsoft contracts. And because of that, they're on Teams. And she was bemoaning the fact that so many of their internal meetings, so few people are turning on their cameras or even trying to get them to turn on their cameras, and they just won't do it. I mean, there is some literal psychological barrier in the corporate world for getting people to participate in regular meetings and look good and sound good. And it's just interesting to me. I think Zoom's preferences for working really hard to enable better tools, more engaging tools, I think this is going to separate. Again, this is entirely anecdotal, but I was shocked because I would have thought they would have come a long way. In the last year, we haven't worked with them very much at all, thankfully. But I have not seen them go in increasing their corporate online utility direction. And I'm seeing more of holding on to the past. A lot of people were coming in. A lot of people work from home. They were talking a lot about the statistics of how many, they've gotten like 40% of people signed up for their home-based remote working. And they expected it to be much more than that. And there's a lot of resistance. So that's anecdotes from a conversation yesterday.
Harshit?
So where I'm going to go with this is with Google, they've been making developer videos lately, but I've been kind of pushing the call out of you do have a production that you're working on and there are other people listening to you and they might want to get into the space of development. So sometimes just to give a little bit of encouragement to these vendors is important. And for the word of accessibility, it's not that you're having to change. Yes, there is work involved, but we want to be included in the conversation. So when we all got COVID, blind people were part of that, that category of everybody had to stay home. We weren't any different than, the average Joe next to you. So when I look at just events in general, I've taken note from Microsoft. They did Ability Summit a couple of years ago, at least. And in that, they use pronouns. So, Harsha Trivedi, he, him, wearing a dark burnt maroon color shirt. That gives just a little bit of inference during the meeting, and it also points and gives you pictures, right? So just saying, I'm a guy talking, I have a shirt like this, I have a beard, those little pieces of information make a difference in, one, you recognize that there's other people there that might be blind, and that's who it's for. The ASL part, we did talk about it yesterday with Mr. Clive in After Hours. And it's funny when some people read lips. So we can't maybe justify everything for everyone. But if you do something, it is noticed. So remember, whenever you present your, something simple, to like something for a church, stuff like that, to something, for corporate. So it still means the same thing either way.
Nigel?
Yeah, I think around events, I think the business models are still a huge problem for many companies. So this is the week of CEDIA, which is the big, home technology show. In a pre-pandemic world, we'd have sent 70, 100 people to that. We're not sending any, except people who live locally this year. And it's really clear to me that CEDIA has spent no time thinking about what will happen if nobody turns up. And my guess is the business model of the company that runs CEDIA is struggling with how to make money doing it any other way. So, there's a famous expression in the finance business called the dead cat bounce, that when you see a share of a dying company jump up again, everyone thinks it's great, but it's just a dead cat bouncing. And I think what we're going to see in the events is some dead cat bouncing, that people are going to try and put events back on. They're going to try and do what they've done before, because quite frankly, they don't have the business model. And I think there was a way for CEDIA to integrate some of the virtual and some of the real, not in a hybrid event where you're trying to do both, but in I wish we could find another word other than hybrid that sort of feels to me like we're trying to do two things at once rather than two different things at the same time. But I don't see the business models coming out yet.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the things we keep on talking about with digital first events, and I think their minds are starting to get around it when we start to illustrate what that will actually mean, because they want people to come to a location, or they want some people to be able to come to a location. And the idea is saying the only thing that is different between a hybrid and a digital first event is really that the speakers are never in the same room as the audience. And if you just make that clear, that the speakers are going to be on a big LED wall in front of folks, or on projection or whatever, but what it means is that every time you add another location, so if your main event is in San Jose and you're going to add a New York one and a London office and everything else, you're going to have everyone's going to have the same experience. And it doesn't mean that you could even put a return camera back from London and a return camera in San Jose, and the speaker can look out there and see them. What it does is it means that your audio is much better, your video is much better. The speaker can seamlessly jump between people in a Zoom to people in London to people in, so other physical locations. Again, the thing that everybody is talking about in not in the event. The problem with events, by the way, is the event group is generally run by a bunch of extroverts who love to hang out with people. That's yes. how they got into that business. If you were an introvert, you didn't end up usually in that business. And so they can't figure out why suddenly, and really there's 30% of the people that desperately want to have in-person events, and they're the ones running the events. So they keep on going, well, this is what we have always done, and it's their comfort zone. There's 30% that could go either way. There's 30% that never want to go to another one. And they'll be dragged in, if they have to. But that's what you're seeing when you look at IBC projected about a 30% drop. NAB had about a 30% drop. There's the 30% that just don't have to do this anymore, and they're not going, and the problem is at a 30% drop, there's a lot of vendors that are going, I don't know if it pencils out anymore. It barely penciled out when they were spending $4 million or $6 million or $8 million on a booth. It now, just especially when they start to understand what's possible. The problem is most people don't see things like office hours very often with a bunch of good cameras and a bunch of good microphones. What they see is what was talked about at the beginning, which is, bad, no camera or bad mics, backlighting. One of the things that, it is a cultural thing within a company. Like one company that I've done a lot of interaction with, which is not a company that's hugely excited about bringing people back, letting people stay at home. They want them to come back to the office. Still, a couple of the folks there started using A7s, and now and suddenly you see a lot of people using A7s because no one wants to be in a company that cares about how things look and feel. No one wants to be left behind, not all of them went that direction, but I think that you see more and more of that. So there is a amount of peer pressure that occurs that when a handful of people start to up their game, especially in when a handful of people start upping their game, especially when it comes to a C-suite or a managers and so on and so forth, other people start to do that too. They start asking, I get questions all the time. I show up in people's meetings and they say, can you send me a list of what you're using? They're not cost, these are, C-level or managers that they're like, and you see people starting to work on their cameras because I think what's coming around for people is that authority is definitely connected to how you look and sound. And that's always been the case, how you dressed and how you looked. And we always said, oh, it's not fair. Well, it's not fair, but it is true. It's not, and so, before it was always, if you went to the marketing team or you went to an executive team, they looked like a whole different race of people. They're taller and they're thinner and they're in great shape and they wear great clothes and they have great cars. And there's a certain way that they are that isn't the way everybody else is. And now suddenly a lot of us have the opportunity to not necessarily look that way, but come across pretty close to the same level. And it's something that they're not used to, and so, but I think that is, it's a real, as Harshid talked about a little bit, it's evening the playing field a little bit. You can even the playing field very quickly with a good camera and good lighting and a good mic, as far as how people listen to you. And so I think that we are seeing that we're seeing people start to get their head around it. And in a company, if you want to make the change, you find the people who are most interested in it, and you dump them with hardware and support. and you get the people that are they were thinking about it, but they're not that clear, and then you dump them with support, and at some point you just kind of roll over the naysayers, and that's how you do anything in a large organization.
But the number, even with you're saying with IBC, that 30% drop, there is an article, and I'll come back and post, but they said that just industry wise, that it's roughly a 60% number that they're seeing with in person, but it's going down. So that being the significant part to focus about. The
problem is you get into what we call it's a death spiral for our industry. And what happens is that they don't have to go to zero to fail. They have to drop by 30, 40, 50%. And suddenly it creates a chain reaction that means that there's not enough people to support to make it worth going. So the brands stop going. Then people start going, well, I can just do this online if not everyone's going to be there. And then less people, and right now the event industry is in the beginning of a death spiral. It's the same thing we saw with like when you look back, you're like, well, magazines were like that. I mean, I've told the story before that I was in front of like almost every magazine executive 20 years ago telling them you need to convert your mailing list to online, now. Like now is the time to do that. And, they literally laughed at me, and so event companies who think that we're going back to physical events, they're wrong. Like, I'm just like, we're not, maybe right now, but that's exactly what Nigel talked about of this kind of, it's a thrash going to go back, but the long-term trajectory, there's so much downward pressure on this. The next recession is going to just destroy, the business. And you have the carbon impact is going to be published all the time within the next 2 years. Like it is going to be, as we start having fires everywhere and there's crazy events and everything else, it will be politically unsustainable to have a large event. And that's going to be it's just going to be a huge downward pressure on physical events. And so that's, so we can thrash around for a little while, but it's over. It's just not done yet.
Nigel?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of double click on what an event is a bit, because I think this might be an interesting theme as well. That if I think about some of the large scale events I've got to, yes, there's the main tent or the ballroom conference session, but there's social. And there's training and there's education and there's demos. And I think what would be important for the events companies to do is to separate those out and say, there are the 30, 40% of the people who want to be in the room. Well, then we'll rely on something for them. There's the people who came for the training. We can do that virtually. There's the events. We can do that, a mixture of virtual and real. And I think if they're going to survive, they're going to have to think about what the audience wants out of attending these events and then apply specific technologies and solutions to that, and not what they've been doing, which is our model as an events company is to run a big event and then we can charge markup and make money for it. And I think that's the hardest switch for them to do.
Alex?
And I think that one of the when we talk about the digital verse, and we talked about it a fair bit yesterday, is when you build the expo so that it can be broadcasted, when you build the physical event so that it can be broadcasted effectively, that's going to change. That changes a lot of, it makes both of those events work. You want to have dinners, you want to have people run into each other in the hallway. That's all possible. But you got to figure out a way that you're going to get to the other people that aren't coming, or to break your event up into multiple cities. And so that people don't, a lot of people just don't want to get on a plane again. They're like, planes and hotels now are astronomical in cost, and they're losing our bags and we're getting, and that's not going to get better, and so there's a lot of things about it where, can you let people stay in their home city and just go to a physical event that's smaller? So I think you're also going to see an event that used to be 15,000 might be in 20 places. And there are lots of little setups and virtual setups and so on and so forth. And so you can do something. Now, people would say that's a hybrid, but again, the key is to have everybody feel like they're in the front row or in the room with them. And the secret to that is getting the speaker out of the room, because what happens is it creates so much, all the complexity of audio, of getting, being able to talk to people in another space or from virtual and everything else is all related to open speakers and open mics. And then you have an LED wall that you want to use, but putting an LED wall in front of a behind a person creates moire. And so what happens is that when someone says we want to do a hybrid event, there's this incredible amount of complexity that we're adding because we want to have a virtual audience watching something physical. Whereas if we just do that one little thing, suddenly costs go down, quality goes up, interaction goes up, all of those things, start to work on. The other thing that people are going to get eventually is something that we're doing here, which is companies could do this every day. They could be interacting, and they could be interacting with their audience every day, or every week, or whatever they want to do as far as, but companies should be doing what we're doing, but they should be doing it, Q&A, Black Magic should have its own thing where every day there's cameras on Monday and there's switchers on Tuesday, and they have their experts and they have other experts coming in talking about it, and that kind of thing. And Apple could be doing that, and Adobe could be doing that. And when they get their head around that, that's when these big physical events mean less and less to them, because they're attracting their audience on their own and supporting that audience without having to go anywhere.
That trend is kind of happening but it's still looking at it from a large event space, like looking Verizon, the way they did their keynote presentation. But really StreamYard, and feel free to jump in, anyone, they're the ones that just doing that weekly communication, that virtual event with their community, and getting the Q&A and getting the feedback and engaging with them. Now I'm seeing that more and more with companies, that educational piece, and that being the event. And
the hard part is, and I think that what ZoomISO version 2, one of the reasons I'm so excited about it, is it gives us kind of a open playing field to design it, whether we're using vMix or using ATEMs or whatever, is to design something that looks a little nicer. The problem with StreamYard is that it doesn't look very good, and it is functional, and the people who are doing the events are like, well, it works and it's easy, but there's the ceiling of quality on StreamYard is very low, so it's easy to get into, but you can never make it really individual and really, what you want. Like I watch people constantly when they're using StreamYard, they get to a certain point and that's as good as it's ever going to get,
right.
And so, and it doesn't, the problem really is that we do, even here, we pay attention to it. We have to be clear that people spend all day watching TV. We don't have to make it all look like Monday Night Football, but it all has to look as good as the local news. Like we're going to have to get to that point with most of our stuff that we're doing for people to take it seriously. Otherwise, it's just a dumb corporate event, and that's and so you have to get it to a point where it feels like broadcasting, and that takes a lot. It takes, reducing the number of picture-in-pictures. It takes reducing the number of things that corporate does that makes it look stale, and so and they have to really be looking at broadcast all the time. And how do we get something that people are used to looking at, every day when they're not here?
And the StreamYard reference was mainly for them, their weekly, the weekly lives that they do with their community. George?
So many points have been touched here. I'm gonna piggyback on Nigel a little bit. Being back in the field now, it's been definitely difficult over the past couple of weeks to see us as an industry. And when I say us, and I don't want to say, I'm going to use the word some here also. Some companies are just, we're back in it and we're going to do the same old, and the quality is just not there. I think when Nigel mentioned training, there has to be, companies overall, and I'm speaking about AV companies, have to be willing to invest in training. And most of the AV companies are using freelancers. So all the freelancers are not necessarily trained in the positions they need to be in. I'm talking about more of newer positions for virtual stuff. But I see that's the big part of the challenge right now. We're just kind of back in doing these events. And I think one of the biggest challenges right now is everyone is still, like ZoomISO, to me, V2 has leapfrogged what Zoom is, but there's such a big pushback also on Zoom in a ballroom event, because no one wants to embrace that, because then it's taken away from their business. So there's all these bigger, greater challenges right now in whether it's the training space or the AV space, because everyone wants to get back to selling the E2s and doing the same old things that we did before. So until we really get to a point where the industry is going to say, okay, this is where we need to go, this is how we need to train, what is freelance, and it's fine. I've kept training here in office hours, but I'm going to always speak openly and say, not everyone has kept up and what's going on during the pandemic or where we need to be now. So there's other folks are still behind. So like Nigel said, there's going to be a need for training, but that's not happening right now. And there's going to be a need for companies to really step up and say, you know what, this is where we need to go next with our industry. And that's what we need to be doing versus, okay, we just need to make the quick dollars right now. We're going to go back to doing the same old.
Harshi?
I wanted to bring up American Council for the Blind up here. They've been doing stuff progressively since COVID has started virtually. But the approach that I've seen them take is more of a radio-like or call-in situation. So they're taking their audio streams and you get about 9 channels. You call into the number. And let's say you want to learn about woodworking. You could hit the channel 5 and listen to it. So again, it's audio. Right. So audio is significant. It's important. And it's also important to note the differences in audio. What is a dynamic using a microphone that compared to a condenser microphone? So I think when we do events, some of the costs do bear quite a impact on our bottom line. But to still include equipment that's going to match how good you look or how good you feel, because it makes a world of a difference. I noted from just being in office hours and hanging out and after hours that there is a significant change in audio or sound, or, these folks might not know what equipment they have to work with. So sometimes doing a little bit of outreach and just to note, hey, you know what? Go check out office hours or go check out this event we did in OH-Space and just look at how it took, multiple people to gather around to do that event. And so when I'm looking at American Council of the Blind specifically, I've seen improvements over time, but it also might take some bit of outreach to say, hey, this is how you could do it better, and this is how you could take your streams, such as a question posed to Zoom yesterday. ISOs, they're incredible. A lot of blind people like using Mac. They use iPhones all the time. So why not incorporate, best of audio if that's what you need? So some of these questions that we pose to, let's say, Microsoft, to Google, to Zoom, to whomever, Apple, they are important. They might be insignificant to others. They're not going to listen to me and a million people, but one question can change a lot of things.
That's well said. Well said. Alex?
Yeah, and I think that part of the reason that I created Office Hours when I started it was that I was concerned that after COVID, we would go back to physical events. Just to be clear, this was built as a system to thwart that, and it is, and I knew that, to George's perspective, that if someone wasn't training people and if we weren't training each other and we weren't all figuring it out and we were all failing, now I expected COVID to come back and, we'd be back in events in 6 months, not in 2 years. But it was definitely like people need to learn how to do this or they will go back to what is safe. And it's what happened with Hangouts. People went back to, things that were safe because it was so hard to do. And so the thing is that we are going to continue to be the sharp end of the stick, and we are going to continue to push this down the path. And we are more and more being used as examples for what it could look like, and that's what we have to keep on creating. And by the end of 2023, we will be doing our own conferences in the way that we're talking about. And we're going to show people how this looks, and what that's going to look like. And we're going to, and what people have to see is everything's done on a demo or a deck, so we're building decks, but next year we'll be building demos, so right now we're covering other people's conferences and we're figuring things out, but we're not that far away from doing our own, and they'll start off small. But a little, virtual event conference kind of thing. That is a mixture of some expo and some people there and some, to show that whole process. But I think we have to illustrate for people what that looks like. And so we'll be working more and more on that. But I think that's what we have to do from this group is continue to create great examples. People ignore what's happening at their own at their own risk. This is coming, and it won't matter at this point whether we're doing it. When you look at what's possible, and I will say that ZoomISO is a big piece of it, that we're going to have some, we're going to use that tool in heavily to kind of push these kind of blend all of these physical and virtual locations in a way that we just couldn't do before this.
And to our producers, this is a great opportunity for you to ask any of the questions that you have just as you're tossing over some of these business cases and what we're discussing here in the industry. Go ahead and submit your questions. I also added the link that said that, just to be clear, that 65% being, is this the good as it gets number for people returning to events. And I also, in prep for today's show, was just even doing some outreach to some of the communities that I'm in. And one of our marketing events communities, they've said that they no longer print material at the events that they go to. They're using QR codes. So just some of those elements that we might gloss over, but that do impact what they are doing with their events. And also, since IBC just took place, just looking even on their YouTube and social media, like just the use of video leading up to the event. While that might be normal for us, that these are just some ways to help, clients or even the organizations that we're working in, for them to have video that shows how to even use the virtual space. I've seen the organizations that are really successful with their virtual events. Those are those key elements that they have. So before you even attend, here's a video that shows you how to navigate this space. Like, that makes a huge difference. And that we can file that under customer experience. Like, those are the things that, as we talk about the bugs in the systems or people's camera quality, our ability to even provide better customer experience for clients or teams, but then also the attendees that are coming to attend the events. Guy?
Yeah, it's wild because I'm watching my Facebook feed right now, and friends that are standing in line at the IBC Amsterdam airport have been standing there for 4 hours. And it's just this thing of, we got to watch it play out, of people going back to doing what they were doing, feeling those effects of high prices, long lines, heat. And it's just like, is it really worth it? And so I think Aperture did one of the best jobs that I've seen on a company live stream, where they invited other guests. They invited Matthews. There was a couple other, but they had over 1,300 people on their live stream. And I got a peek behind the scenes, and it was just a high-powered gaming PC with OBS. And they had 1,300 people on in a community that they slowly built up. And so that's the other thing that people are forgetting about, is just this watch time, dwell time, comments. I think the industry's in for a shock when they start to see who has the ability to get all those comments and those eyeballs lickety split, versus, because a lot of these influencers have built up these fans over time. And I think what we're doing, we're building up the ability to bring in a lot more people when Alex wants to turn it on. But I think what he's saying, I'm starting to really resonate with me, because I see it. I see that I spent $25,000 on a booth at Infocom, and I walked away with less than 100 leads. So, when they start doing the math, how many people stopped by the booth? How many badge scans did you get? What's that worth? I mean, 25,000 divided by 100, I mean, $250 a lead. Like, really? Like, what could you do with that kind of money on Google AdWords and LinkedIn ads and live video and getting people in front? But it shocked me to see somebody like Shure, who did a webinar, big microphone company. They get a couple hundred people, and then some influencer pops in and they could get 1,000. Like one of our audio guys, Curtis Judd, he does lives. I'll put his YouTube channel up. Look at his lives and look at all the comments that he gets. It's pretty telling as to where we're going.
And you touched on a really good point there, Guy, with like the combination of influencer marketing and these webinars. Like, companies have been doing webinars for some years now, but them not only up-leveling that in their sales funnel, but the collaboration that takes place between the influencer community, but then also businesses, and seeing how that can help in increasing attendance, but also the ROI that takes place from that. As Nigel mentioned earlier, there's still this struggle with understanding the business of events and the events that you create, and that return in a digital first world that we're in right now. Bill, let's head into some of these questions.
Okay, first one comes from Paul Shadwell in Turbenthal, Switzerland. And he says, one of the issues I've come across is that people don't turn on their cameras because their IT have told them that it sucks up bandwidth and it's better not to turn them on. I've had several discussions on this with IT staff. Has anyone else had this issue?
Go ahead, Bill.
And the answer to me is heck yes. And in fact, 10 years ago, I got into a large discussion. I had a pretty large corporate client. They had stores all over the US. I think it was close to 750 at the time. They eventually got to 1,500 or 2,000. So I said, listen, we're making training for you and we're doing robust every week kinds of send outs. And can we just put this on some sort of digital server so that the stores can look at them? And I got back the most rapid and terse heck no, not just no, but heck no. And I said, well, why? I said, you don't understand. IT right now, we're pulling registers every night. We're going through all these metrics that are absolutely critical, mission critical to the business. And this kind of stuff, I mean, our sales reporting, things like that affect our SEC, compliance, share price metrics. We are never going to let you anywhere near our infrastructure with something as low priority as video training. So I took that to heart, and I just realized that sometimes we think that what we do is the center of these kind of circumstances, and sometimes they're not. For the progressive companies who understand that employee training can be as mission critical as anything else, and bad customer experiences because of poor training can definitely lead to bad experiences and bad internet chatter and everything else that'll hurt your reputation. It's still really hard to get those folks who are in control of the corporate servers to look outside of those core IT for the corporation functions.
Go ahead, George.
So the corporate IT in-house, obviously their job is to protect the network, and they're going to do that by all means necessary. You have to make friends with them and get them to understand what you really need done. On the broader scope, IT outside of the corporate is in for a rude awakening. That's your hotels and so forth. Because there's, I know Alex does a great job with his team bringing in his own IT, but I've been on jobs lately where we really brought in heavy hitters on the IT side to really take control of the network in the convention center. And you can actually have your own line dropped into that area. You're going to pay for it, but the end goal is to make sure that your entire event goes well as far as IT. And if you can't get the help from the IT in-house or in corporate, you're going to bring in your own infrastructure. And that's where we're going next. So IT is going to be in for a rude awakening on the outside as to the service that they're providing if they don't start providing the service necessary. But you're only going to have so much control in the in-house IT.
And Nigel.
In the early days of the iPhone and the iPad, there were all sorts of enterprise IT departments that said, we're never going to allow these dangerous devices on our networks until the CEO brought in their new iPhone. And then the IT department changed its strategy significantly or found itself being outsourced. So I think some of this is going to be the leadership of the company being willing to be on the camera all the time, being present, having a good quality of sound and picture. And I think the biggest issue I've seen, at least, is if the leaders don't do it, the followers won't do it. And I think to show by example, the IT departments will have to catch up at some point.
And Bill.
I actually agree 100% with Nigel, but it's interesting. We had a client here locally who had a production studio, a full-blown production studio. They were going toward being able to produce all their materials in-house. Right before the pandemic hit, they lost the key employee who was in charge of that initiative. They had spent millions of dollars on equipping this facility. And through the course of the entire pandemic, it has sat there and done nothing. And so at some point, they got a hold of us and we got a hold of them, and they were interested in at least reconfiguring some of the original purchase decisions for a more web-friendly thing. And I kept waiting for the call back going, why aren't you making this a priority? You have this fabulous facility. It would be really easy for the CEO to do a weekly address to the troops and do a lot of leadership motivation and a lot of just information pass along to all your retail branches. It just never was going to happen, and it hasn't happened to this day, and the equipment is just aging out. This beautiful facility is aging unused into nothingness, and it's purely thought leadership at the top. Most of the embedded leaders don't think in these ways. Maybe the next generation, as these older leaders get replaced by younger people who've come up in the digital age, they will understand the potential power of this kind of communication to motivate, inspire, and lead. But right now they tend to just occasionally, if it's a big deal marketing message or something like that, I'll go on camera and I'll do something, but it's not how they're wired at this point, and that's sad.
Next question. Oh, Alex. Oh, sorry.
All I was going to say, I was going to underline the CEO issue. I was in an airport and I was talking to a guy and he said, I asked him what he does. And he goes, well, right now I'm converting my entire Flash, the Flash website to back to HTML5. And I said, why are you, we just finished it last week. And I said, why are you doing that? And he goes, because the CEO said, why can't I see it on my iPhone? And he said, well, and I tried to explain it to him, and he goes, that wasn't really the question. The question is, when will I see it on my iPad, on my iPhone? Wow. And he goes, and he said, and literally it was 2 years of development that just went gone because someone who makes the decision decides to go, and so they had to pivot the entire thing to, out of Flash. And there was a bunch of those, and that was the end of Flash. So it really was, when you serve you have to pay attention, and in some cases you serve the top down, in some cases you serve the bottom up. But you have to. The key is to not get caught up with the people that say no. It's supporting the people who say yes. Like you use them as a cudgel. like people who say yes, you arm them, you support them, you use them, and you just push through the people. All the people who are saying yes is the people you want. The people who say no will be right until they're not. And you don't worry too much about them.
Bill, next question. We're on the next question. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Moving on to let's see. Yeah, the Paul Wallace question, right? Austin, Texas. Paul comes from.
No, the QR one.
Oh,
it's already loaded. Yeah,
that's why I'm confused. It had my name on it. And here's what I asked. Liberty mentioned using QR codes as a way to replace print. What type of portal should a link like that lead to? I mean, it's real easy to put up a QR code, but what's a good design for progressive info disclosure via that kind of link target when you don't know who's going to be clicking on it?
Oh, well, great question. What I have seen and some of the things that we've done in the past too, the QR code is like the brochures, and know that it's not just necessarily one QR code that is for everything. There could be on entrance, there's a QR code for them for a giveaway. Then on next entrance or pamphlet or on the monitors, there's a QR code. So essentially the QR code just basically gets the information that you want shared to the audience. So not so much of a design thing. And I will pop this in the chat in Mukana of like, there are a lot of QR code generators that will whatever link, because ultimately it's like this design that goes directed to whatever link you have. So as a best practice, just making sure that whatever that landing page is, that it's legible, like the typical design, web design, UX type of design issues or design that you would have. So that, and remembering that it's on a mobile device. So that part of like load speed and font type and not having too much information, not having long, lots of scrolling, those types of things would be of concern. Bill?
Well, I was just interested, so does that mean that the web folks in organizations have to think about one or more public landing pages that are specifically designed to take someone who doesn't know anything about the organization and bring them in? Does that function become the same as the initial splash page for the corporate? I guess I'm concerned about the fact that if you're at a trade show and you put up something and we are demonstrating this factor this time at this trade show, I'm not sure that sending them to the main corporate website and having them try to figure out where to find information about that thing makes good sense.
Right. Definitely. So let's say, for example, there's this presentation. The idea is that QR code only goes to that information. Like it should not be just like landing pages are designed and the new way people are using landing pages as this single page, single message, single thought process that you want the individual to take action. Because if there's too much going on, that, a confused mind doesn't make a decision. So that, to answer your question, is that whatever that action is that you're looking for. You're not necessarily driving them to the main page unless this is, hey, you finished the presentation, or you specifically, it's for the website. That's the only time. And what I've seen a lot too from a networking perspective is a lot of people will have those codes for contact. Again, I'll come back with some links. So it's a QR code that will give you all the links to how to contact them. And so it has their LinkedIn, it has their telephone number, it has their email address, and then going from there. So those are just some of those uses that we're seeing in like on-site at conferences or again, at networking events. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Can you address John Snyder's comment about events that don't span more time? Why limit to 1 day or 10 days? How do you provide year-round relevance?
Nigel?
So I think if you went to an average events team and suggested a year-round event, they would hide under their beds and never come out again. It's hard enough to do an event without doing it all year. Plus the fact, there are great benefits for an events team doing a lot of stuff in one place at one time, both career and other reasons. I think what we have to do is open the aperture up and say that training is probably not being done by the events team. The sales support, the sales enablement, all of that side is not being done by the events teams. It's being done by other teams in the business. And I think we've got to expand the aperture out of the events team into the sales support, sales enablement, training, and whatever it is, and find a way to offer them services that allow them to differentiate themselves, and then let them go fight for the budget for them to do more. Events teams are never going to buy into an annual event. It's never going to be worth it for them.
Alex?
Yeah, and to Nigel's point, typically the events team and the ongoing training team and the outreach team are under different C-suite verticals. And so there's literally a different vice president that's managing that. And they have their own budgets and they have their own directives, and that makes it much harder to do a lot of these things because they can't think in that exactly the same way that Nigel talked about. They can't think in that way because they're there to do events. And sometimes they're doing lots of them. One social media company, I think, before the pandemic was doing, 15,000 events a year. Just to put it in perspective, somewhere in the world. They were little, they were big, but they all had coffee and cookies, and so they, they know how to do all those things. And so the key though, when you think about these events, is the one thing that is truly insane is multiple sessions at the same time. So tracks are insane with a virtual event, and the reason that we build tracks is because we had to rent the hotel, and the hotel has lots of rooms, and we don't have enough, you don't have enough time, and you want to do all those things. And I was used to tracks until I went to TED. So I went to TED Africa in 2007, and I saw the power of everybody in the same conversation at the same time. And then and what TED did is they gave you long breaks. And so we'd watch for about an hour and a half or 2 hours, incredible, inspiring speakers. And then we'd walk around and talk to each other. And then we'd come back and we'd watch a couple more inspiring people. And they did it over 3 or 4 days. And I suddenly was like, oh, that experience was so much better than anything I had ever seen in the almost 20 years that I had been doing conferences, that I completely lost interest in tracks, and now the key is that what virtual events allow us to do is have those tracks go end to end. This week, we're going to talk about this. This week, we're going to talk about this. This week, we're going to talk about this. And we're no longer constrained by time and space, and we can have a small conference that has a handful of those things talking about it. And the key is to think that I'm going to do a handful of things in the physical world, but then that this event will keep going. And it could even be starting before the show. Like what you're going to see for instance, with what we're doing here and what we're doing with Michael Krasny is questions. We're going to tell you out in advance, hey, we're going to talk to this person. You can start asking questions and having discussions about it weeks or months in advance. And we might even have meetings about it. And then afterwards, we can keep talking about that. And those are all things that are missing right now in the physical event space, is this kind of long tail, long connection with everyone, because it wasn't really possible before. Before, it was just a mailing list. Like we'd send you mail, but we couldn't have you interact. We couldn't have you part of a community. So a lot of it is that the technology has changed, and people haven't caught up with that. But the folks that do, it's very, very important for organizations to build a direct connection with their customers very soon, because the world of mass marketing is going to die in this decade. So the Facebooks, the advertising, all those other things, you have to build a direct connection and not expect to be able to survive on marketing in the next 10 years. You know, and I can dig into that at some point, but there's trouble coming. You know, people, you know, and a lot of it is connected to what we will call a unique digital persona. When people get that, and they start, and Apple is working towards this, things will change very quickly. And for digital marketers, not in a good way. So imagine someone being able to say, "This is who I am," and be able to turn off all tracking, you know, against everything. And that is, that's coming. You know, there's a lot of people working on that, and people are going to, and you're going to see the people that matter from a money perspective all basically cutting out everybody and not allowing anybody to track them, you know, and using those tools to do that. And that will devastate a market, because it'll only leave them with the folks that are willing to do that. And that's not the market that they need to run their businesses.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to build on what Alex said a bit, in the days of yore, it mattered only that you had the product. And the most famous example was you can have it in any color as long as it's black. And then the most powerful thing you could have was the best sales force. And IBM dominated the computer business because it had the best sales force. That all ended when Microsoft showed how mass marketing could beat sales. And they took over from that. Mass marketing is dying for experiences and relationships. And those that are stuck in any of the other three previous models will die.
Yeah, and adding to that, I really wish, please, if you are in I'll post it as well. Well, the chat links will go into Discord as well. The Accenture video and more so the Accenture one, because of what Alex is sharing on community and seeing how their use of showing, hey, we're doing so much work in the metaverse or even if you've got kids or you've heard about like Roblox and all these experiences that happen, like that community part of it is huge because of all of the things that are happening with Facebook and data, as Alex shared. And if, again, this is a conversation around trends, just seeing how community building is taking like a forefront to actually before the events are happening. I got a call over the weekend of someone saying, hey, we have these events coming up and we're asking your team come out and help us, you know, with the content so that they can use it to promote the next one, but highlight the stakeholders in the room and engage with them and what that means for the greater community that they're trying to reach. So just that focus on community being an important trend to pay attention to. Next question.
Jeff Keithley out of Texas, our friend, says, we need to better define the events you feel are suffering. Our sporting events and social events are packed to the gills.
George?
So I do a lot more association events, so I could only speak on that particular part of the events that I do. And I don't know that's definitely suffering, but on the technical side of things, I want to, it's just what I mentioned earlier about just being able to put on those events. I mean, in general, and we talk about this in office hours a great deal, we're going to pull off the event regardless. We're going to make it happen, but it doesn't mean you leave there stressed out at the end of the day. So that's all I'm speaking about, is that you're going to pull off the event regardless, essentially, but there's a lot going on backstage and, you're going to make it happen, but it doesn't mean that it's going well backstage, but you're going to make it happen.
Yeah. Bill?
I think existing groups, people who are fans of something will always want to gather. So if you provide them good things like sporting events, particularly in areas that are defined, I think that's going to be something where building that community will always be a little easier than it is for like a corporate meeting where a lot of the people who need the information, there are going to be some people who are highly engaged at the top of the corporate things, but there's a ton of employees below them, some of whom are well engaged, but often there's large groups of them who aren't well engaged, and it's going to be hard to get them motivated and excited to come to ongoing meetings and things like that. And you have to work at building that audience and keeping them there and doing something to make them want to come rather than forcing them to come, which I think too many of the ones that are suffering right now have been trying to do.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, sporting events are going to continue to do well for quite a bit of time, and it depends on how close they are to the top of the pyramid. The sporting events that are lower in the totem pole than the major leagues are going to have trouble over time because an increasing number of kids aren't playing them. I mean, even they're already talking about this in football, that's starting to dry out because you shouldn't let your kids play football anymore. So it's really bad for their head. So like my son just said, I'm not going to play it. He's big. He would be a great lineman, and he's not playing, and I'm not pressuring him to, because I want him to make money with his head, and so I think that you're going to see that kind of be a problem because esports are going to slowly usurp much of the lower part of the pyramid. The reason that hasn't really happened up until now, and we see huge events, is because currently the sporting events that are being broadcasted are made by the esports events that are being broadcasted are made by gamers, not by people who are thinking about TV. They have gamers talk to people about TV, and they end up with Overwatch, and it's still way too complicated. And so the thing is that when they figure out that they need an open field and that they need to have a certain level of cameras, they're going to run everybody over because they'll be able to produce content that is way more, stimulating than what we see on most major league football or baseball or whatever. So I think that'll be interesting to see. But I think that also when we're talking about events, I think we're not talking about sports right now. And what I will say is that the sports market, when you take the major leagues out, is probably 100th the size of the corporate and education market. It's a very small market compared to the stuff that happens every single day somewhere. And as far as, concerts, you just want to watch how many artists, now that it's been okay to cancel your thing for health, watch how many do that. They've already started. Justin Bieber just did it. There's a series of folks. When we talk, I work on concerts. When we talk to artists, and we talk about doing virtual ones that could make them this similar money that they're making touring, they're just ready to stop. Like they would go from 60 cities to 10 if they were able to, and they still want to have the experience every once in a while. They just don't want to do it every day. And so, the artist, as soon as that market grows to a point that will support the artist and they can make the money, they'll drop it like a hot potato, and so that market is successful right now, but in a precarious place. And you just want to always be careful of thinking that because things are rosy right now, that's the way it's going to be all the time. Romans didn't last forever, and nothing does. And we're about to make a transition, and you're going to see flailing back and forth for the next five years or so. But then we're going to see something a lot different moving forward.
And just pulling in some quickly of the comments, Jesse Mills says, that's right, Bill. Different types of events have different in-person return rates. And that, yes, Jeff, because if you look at what rose during COVID or during the pandemic, were sports, were entertainment. So not those types of events, because that's part of just human nature and wanting to be entertained, but the corporate, the professional meetings, that arena. And I think the article, I posted a link to that article that spoke about the return rates. That's what they're referencing there. And we'll wrap with George.
So it's a question for Alex. So on the whole concert bit, how do you see as like producing a concert, let's say in your studio up on your end, and broadcasting it where you see Live Nation experimented with putting concerts directly into the movie theater. Obviously, we're not going to the movie theaters like we were before. So where do you see those concerts being broadcast to?
Kanye did an event to IMAX in the spring. He sold out all the theaters that were available in less than 8 hours. It is, the only thing missing is more of them, And so, if we watch, specifically, I think probably IMAX is on the front end of this puzzle, and I think that they've published a couple of their numbers, but they're aiming to have, I believe, 250 theaters by the end of the year, and the thing is you have to look at what that actually means from a perspective, because what it does is it gives you back some of that social experience without having to deal with 70,000 people. So if you have let's say a bunch of theaters that are 300 people each, and you have 500 of them, you end up with a lot of people. It's 150,000 people that are available for a market. That's bigger than any stadium that they have, to do that. And so, and you could do it all in one night, and you could, in that kind of market, a band could play this from the same stage 5 nights in a row and make as much money as they made on the whole tour. So the thing is that those are the kind of things that I think we're going to, just based on, and I think that we're probably going to see more concerts and more live activations. I mean, again, it's easy to say when the Model T came out, it was not as good as a horse. You had to put gas in it all the time. It broke down all the time. It wouldn't go off road. It didn't, it was difficult to deal with. There was only a handful of people that could use it. I mean, we're in the Model T area. And so we should not mistake the horses for the future. But the Model Ts are coming out. And when they turn in, another couple generations, which will happen much faster than they did for the Model T, another couple generations, and it's not going to, the big game is not going to be, because we can talk about these things, but still 99% of the market is being left out every time you do a physical event, of your addressable market of the people who might buy your product. And so the thing is the physical events were necessary, and they will still, exclusive physical events will still happen. But these large mass events are not going to be able to, again, they don't have to drop in attendance by 90% to fail. If they continue to be 30% under their 2019 numbers, the business model no longer works. So if they can't recover that in the next couple of years, you're going to see one conference after another. If they can't they have to get up above 70% of what their previous numbers were, or the business model is not going to work, and they're just going to collapse.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Douglas Carmichael. He says, why do you think Zoom invested in the American Express global business travel?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, you have to understand, Zoom is a global business. So is American Express. And I remember reading at one point a business philosophy book, and they were talking about management by wandering around. And basically, it was CEO, C-suite people, get out of your offices, don't sit there all day on your computer, get down and look at what's happening on the floor of your operations. I think in a global sense, there's always going to be a need for people to travel out to actually look at the physical world. Now, this is different than events and things like that. This is just, sometimes you don't see problems unless you're on the ground and see them. So I think it's a good fit for American Express and Zoom to be tied together for those needs that Zoom has as it continues to spread out across the world and become a major force in global communications, to have that tie-in with a travel partner who can help them do that. I'm reminded of the Michael Crichton book and movie. I don't know if they did a movie, Disclosure, but the point of it was they kept saying, solve the problem. The little voice kept saying, solve the problem. And the problem turned out to be in the factory. They were cutting corners, and that's why their business was failing, is because nobody was boots on the ground, and they had one bad executive who was shielding the bad news from corporate. And the only way you can break through that kind of paradigm is to have some management people actually physically getting out there.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Harshi Trivedi here at Daytona Beach, Florida, on the panel. How do we incorporate security layers with QR codes or other delivery methods?
I took a quick look that they are, because it's technology, so people can hack, is one of the things. I think it's QRC, like there's an extra C on it in how they're doing it. I have to do a little bit more research, because you raised a really good question there. But ultimately, since it is pointing to whatever that landing page or wherever you're directing it to, the need for that end. So I don't know that it's so much the code element as it is the security that you have behind what you're pointing or what you're directing to. But definitely security is a conversation that security and privacy are not going anywhere, and those conversations continue to persist. So we'll see where that goes. Next question.
Comes to us from Cindy Drozdy in Erie, Colorado. And she says the woodturning community wants to do quality digital events with multiple presenters that attendees can view in separate rooms. Is there an events platform that offers this?
Go ahead, Alex.
You could definitely do it in Zoom with breakout rooms and make that work. I'm going to keep on coming back to the question of why you're doing two things at one time. So there's a real value in everybody being part of something. And if someone asked me to do that, I would very quickly move to doing these in series over multiple days. Again, with virtual events, they didn't pay for a ticket. They're not paying for hotels every night. They're not, like there isn't the upfront costs that keep people from you extending that event over multiple days. So you can definitely do this in a couple different places. But what I would really think about is doing things to really think about series rather than parallel. Parallel creates FOMO, fear of missing out. And, so the thing is what makes live valuable. There's 3 reasons to go live. And I still don't think there's more than that. Sports, breaking news, and interactivity. And we're not doing sports or breaking news right now, but the interactivity is everything in those live events. And if you make people choose between 3 or 4 different rooms, you're creating tension and frustration because they want to see all of them. If they're into woodturning, they want to see you. They want to see, everybody else that's doing this. And every woodturner is cutting their potential audience into 4. If there's 4 of them going on, you'd much rather have all of them look at yours and then come back tomorrow at 2 and do another one, and then come back tomorrow, or do them. Yours isn't from 8 to 1 and somebody else is from 2 to 6 or whatever that is. You do it in series, not in parallel.
Next question.
Next one comes from Colin Mulcahy in Dublin, Ireland. And Colin says, what's your take on event management companies who pivoted during COVID to do virtual events with traditional AV companies, not broadcasting or streaming companies, and overpriced for the services?
Go ahead, George.
So Colin, first, so event management companies have always had a relationship with AV companies. That's the survival really of the association industry and corporate. So as far as the pricing, a lot of these companies have to build these massive infrastructure, and they didn't go the route, let's say, of Zoom. They went the route of building out their own platforms to facilitate with the client's needs. So they had to overprice those events to pay for, obviously, building out these systems. And now they're all being wound down, like I said, and coming back to in-house. So as far as the pricing, it had to be marked up. As far as the AV and events management, it's always had a relationship.
And Alex.
Yeah, I think that the issue is they had to find a way to differentiate themselves. If everybody has Zoom, you have to figure out what is my value add, to that process. And I think that they had a hard time figuring that out. And so building something very specific. Also, really up until now, the level of control that you had over individual video feeds and everything else was so truncated inside of Zoom that it was very hard for them to do what they would consider a professional level event. So they weren't able to have individual feeds. They weren't able to have the ISO audio. They weren't able to have the remote controls that they needed. And that's why I keep on coming back to Zoom. ISO version 2 has been something we've been very incorporated into, talking with them, doing testing, doing those other things. And it's not everything we wanted, but we now have a team that's going to keep pushing that down the path. But I think that when this started at COVID, Zoom was a long way away. There was no ZoomISO. There was no those things. And you had to kind of figure out how to cobble it together and not have little things pop up underneath it and do all the things that were really rough. And so they built out a lot of those things. And the other thing I will say in defense of the budgets is that most Zoom events are not done with real budgets that it takes to do a professional event. They're done, people see them as virtual events and they pay accordingly, and they're not paying for what it really takes to have the infrastructure that makes a show great. And so I think that's what we also saw is a lot of bad events that didn't have the budget that they needed, and some events that had a lot more budget because companies, especially large brands, the most expensive part of every event for a large brand is failure. It doesn't, the money is not the issue. It's really, if it fails, it makes the brand look bad, and it makes people not come back. And so they're willing to pay a company that they already knew to do something that it says it knows how to do. And it didn't always work that way, but that was the concept.
Well, That's a wrap for another show. We've long passed the 900 mark. So thank you so much to our producers for your questions, panelists for your thoughts, your insights, and of course to our production team, our backend crew, for without which this would not be possible. Be sure to head over to officehours.global so that you can see more about the shows that are coming up this week. And now we're getting ready to sign off, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
miles. 53,194 miles.
That's a lot of miles.
I know, that's halfway to 1K. Halfway to 1K on United.
That was a great show.
That was a good show. It's good. Awesome. A lot of good conversation. 85,000 kilometers for those of you outside the United States. That's what we call the Tlaloc traversal. Yes.
There it is. See y'all soon.
Bye-bye. I can't get out of the McLaughlin group sounding. Question. Bye-bye. It's my entire childhood Sunday morning watching.